It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. A little fun stuff for Phil here. I bought a home espresso machine, and it's kicking my ass, I guess. I'm trying to dial it in, as they call it, to make it really smooth espresso, and so far I've managed to get an espresso that tastes kind of bitter to a whole lot bitter. I mean, some of them were just god-awful. So I can tell when improvements are made. It's just not quite good enough yet. So I'll have to do some experimenting. And I did buy beans from a local roastery, and it was a small bag, thankfully. But went through that whole bag and finally kind of sort of got it halfway decent. But then the bag ran out. Thankfully, I had ordered some Italian roasted beans, and after just a couple of attempts, I got something a little bit better than the other bag that I went through. So I think the bean makes a difference too. Everything makes a difference. The humidity, the temperature. Oh my God, it's complicated. But, something fun while we're stuck at home. Speaking of stuck at home, of course, the protests nationwide are increasing, and I just this morning saw a video from Madison, Wisconsin, where apparently they had something like 3,000 people, 98% of them without face masks, and probably a good 25% of them with great big guns, because nothing says give me my freedoms like a bunch of guns. So we have that going on in the United States, and of course we thought maybe, or at least I heard some people claim that maybe as early as 2 weeks ago, around April 12th, Easter Sunday, what I have now coined as Easter Infection Day, was going to be the peak. And I think what they meant was it's going to cause the peak, because after almost 2 weeks of new cases around 30,000, we've now had a 35 and a 39 out of the blue. And I think that is not just coincidence that's less than 2 weeks after the Easter weekend, where lots and lots of people got together and celebrated in person without proper safety precautions. And so now we will see if that gets even worse with these big rallies like Madison, Wisconsin, 3,000 people. If a handful of those people are infected, there could be dozens, hundreds of new infections in a week or two in Madison. So hopefully it's going away magically, as Donald Trump would say, but I'm just not feeling it. The numbers keep growing around the globe, and the question that has come up in our household is it just something that we're going to have to burn through? And it might be. And so now the question is, what is the right balance of the pace of everyone getting infected? Do we want to get it done and over with and let those who die because the systems are overloaded? Or do we want to stretch it out and hopefully save as many people as possible? Because I do get the idea that many businesses are suffering. And, the Walmarts and the McDonald's of the world are open. You can go through drive-through, but small family-run restaurants where you go in and sit down for an hour or two cannot function. And their landlords may want rent. They have bills to pay. They have their own mortgage to pay. What are they supposed to do? And I think a lot of this would be a lot better if we had a functioning national government, because if the national government just found a way to give everybody a sufficient amount of money for a couple of months, people would do a much better job of staying at home, but because of the gross incompetence at the national level, people are hurting. And I have to be sympathetic to that, because that's the whole thing. Is I want the fewest number of people harmed, and clearly we don't want people dying in hospitals. We don't want people surviving and then having strokes. That's a new thing. We don't want people surviving and having 20 or 30% reduced reduced it's one of the things, like a lot of people don't know that most people survive polio. Which is pretty close to eradicated throughout the world now due to incredible decades and generational long efforts. Most people did survive polio, but you would lose functions in some organs or your legs. You wouldn't be able to walk. You would need crutches. So it's amazing what you can live through. And I'm not saying that coronavirus is that bad, but it's not just you had it and you were sick for a day or two and you're better. There are people who are surviving it, but having lifelong side effects. So it's serious stuff. We should treat it seriously. And, what's the right path? And we can't even seem to have an intelligent conversation about it. And that's what's really heartbreaking. After a quick little break coming up here, I'm going to have a little segment on some email topics that people have asked me. If you would like to ask your question, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I think I have educated my email program enough to not put those in spam anymore. If you sent me something in the past few months and I didn't respond to you either through the show or an email, I might have missed it. I don't mean to be rude. Send it to me again and I'll take a look. And it can be a question that you just want an answer to for yourself. It could be a show topic idea. It could be a speaker idea or a guest interviewee idea. And of course, sending me the really, really big names, like saying, you should interview Jack Black. Yeah, that's great. Sure, I should. But if you're going to suggest somebody famous, why don't you include their phone number or tell me you have contacts? Because I don't have that kind of power. I can't just go and get really, really famous people to show up on my show. Other fun things, of course, right after that, speaking of famous people to be on the show, I'm going to talk to Darren Slade, and he was recommended. I actually put up a request for interview suggestions on the Facebook page for the show, and John Loftus suggested that I talk to Darren Slade, and Darren said, okay, we'll talk. And so I sent him a message and I said, let's talk right now. And I didn't know anything about the guy, and the interview you're going to hear literally starts about 30 to 40 seconds after we first chatted, and I knew almost nothing about him. And so I'm just going to leave it like that, not tell you much other than the thing that I knew is that he was a graduate with a two masters, and a doctorate from Liberty University. So you're going to want to hear what he has to say about religion and being a Baptist and Liberty University. There's my tease. How's that? But I genuinely did not know what he was going to say before we started the interview. So it was great fun. And of course, since I'm locked at home, it was a nice opportunity to have a conversation. So you'll look forward to that. And I guess we'll just go into our break and email topics, and then the really fun interview for today with Darren Slade.
I don't think you have to be a religious person to have good values. So the way I see this is I'm going to start where you started, and that is I believe everyone should be treated with respect. As I said, for me it is a basic value. Every human being has value, and that means every human being should be treated with respect. And that's true whether we're talking about black or white, straight or gay or trans, whether we're talking about old or young. I think this is really an important part of who we are. And if I can, let me just pick up one. Although you mentioned several, but I think maybe it may be the one, since you mentioned it first, is the question about abortion. I understand that you and I may have differences. There may be a lot of different views in this room. But here's what I'm certain about. And that is a woman who's in the position of trying to decide what she's going to do about a pregnancy that she may not have planned for, may not have hoped for, may have been forced upon her, is a woman who should be able to call on anyone for help. She should be able to call on her partner. She should be able to call on her mom. She should be able to call on her priest or her rabbi or her pastor. But the one entity that should not be in the center of that very hard decision is the federal government. That's how I see it.
Of course, I get a lot of email, and sometimes I sit here and I write these long responses, and then I think to myself, hey, that might actually make a show topic. So I have one of these today where someone, I'm assuming is a listener, and of course, thank you for listening, sent me a question about taking money out of a 529 and then putting it into an HSA. And a 529 is a way to save money for educational expenses, usually for your children or grandchildren, possibly nieces and nephews. And I've talked about it before, and if you guys are interested, I can do another segment on that somewhere in the near future. And they're nice, but they have some problems, but there's some positives. So like anything, you kind of need to know what you're talking about. But this question is different because taking money out of the 529 and putting it into their own personal HSA, and in the email they express the knowledge that that might include some taxes and penalties, but would it be a good idea? And so I thought, would it be a good idea? I'm not sure that it would. And one of the things that is different, and I'm going to modify some of the information here just so no personal stuff is revealed. But if you are thinking about pulling money out of a 529 for some reason, the first thing you must consider, is that money going to be useful or possibly be spent on educational expenses of some kind? So if you have a child, a dependent, a niece or nephew, grandkid, or somebody that you can use that money for, it might be better just to leave it there and use it for the purpose or some kind of similar purpose that you had originally intended, that is some kind of educational expenses, because pulling the money out does incur penalties. And this is something, and I'm put in this email response, check with a qualified tax professional on how much that penalty would be. I know it's at least 10% and taxes on the gains. And I think the 10% may only be on the gains. So you'd have to check that out to figure out exactly what your tax cost would be. Now, I'm not aware of any way to move 529 money directly to an HSA. So I considered it two different things. And the first thing I just talked about is the 529. Can it be useful? Can it be spent? Because if you have someone that you're responsible for helping them pay college bills, go ahead and take the money out of the 529 to pay those bills and not pay any penalties at all, and just take other money and put that in an HSA. And of course, the question is, should one use an HSA? Well, like everything, it has pros and it has cons. If you qualify, and the first thing is that you have to be employed and you have to have a high deductible medical plan through your employer. You may qualify if you are self-employed and have your own high deductible medical plan. Not 100% sure on that one. But if you have access to an HSA plan, or you can find one to contribute to, the nice thing about the HSA, the Health Savings Account, is the money that you put in there is tax deductible. It grows tax deferred. And if you take all the money out and spend it on medical costs only, then you never pay tax on that money at all. That's nice. The amount of money you can put in there is around $7,000, maybe $8,000 if you're over 50, which for a lot of people, that's a ton of money, and they'll never be able to qualify to put that much in there. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. One of the concerns I've expressed in the past about HSAs is when people want to use them as something more than a piggy bank. When I had an HSA way in the past, I would put money in, and that money would mostly be spent, and it rolls over, whatever you don't use, which is great, which is way better than an FSA, flexible spending account, savings account, where the money disappears. That's stupid. That sucks. Don't use an FSA. But with the HSA, you can max it out, and if you don't spend all the money, it rolls over. And if you get enough to roll over, your plan may allow you to invest it like it was in an IRA or a 401k. So this becomes a tempting place to invest. One of the problems I have experienced in the past is that because the custodians of the HSA know that you're going to add money, paycheck to paycheck, take out money, medical bill after medical bill, there's often fees and charges because it's not as simple as you putting in money and then investing it. They have to track all the money coming in, all the money going out, and that increases the costs a little bit. So sometimes the costs are higher. There's monthly fees or an annual fee. There might be a higher fee to send you a statement if you want your statements in paper. And you may have considerably limited options. So you'd have to check into the HSA plan that you have or an HSA plan that you may want to get. So it's not necessarily bad, but don't get carried away with it, especially if you're putting money in an HSA at the expense of not fully funding your employer-sponsored plan like a 401k or a 403b, and of course your own IRAs if you qualify, because if all the money goes into your HSA and then you need funds for some other reason, now you do have a penalty to take the money out, and you would have been better off in an IRA or a Roth IRA. So maybe it's a little bit about balance. One of the other things that is a potential concern, if you put a bunch of money in an HSA and then you pass away, you can leave it to your spouse, and that works pretty well. If you don't have a spouse, or the spouse then passes away and leaves it to another beneficiary, often children, nieces, nephews, that kind of thing, then all of the money gets pulled out of the HSA, added to the beneficiary's income, and taxed at their marginal rate. So if their tax rate is 25 or 30%, they have to pay 25 or 30% on all of the money that they get. Now, they may not care that much, because if you send $10,000 to somebody and they pay 25% of that in taxes, they still net $7,500. They're probably not going to complain. However, if that money was inside of an IRA or Roth IRA, and you had that person named as a beneficiary, a non-spouse beneficiary, they are only required to take out a very small amount every year based on their life expectancy, and the funds can continue to grow tax deferred year after year after year after year, sometimes for multiples of decades. And so in the HSA, you lose that benefit if you have a large amount there. So I kind of see the HSA as a really nice way to put money aside to pay ongoing annual medical bills. If it builds up $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 an extra, and you want to start using that when you start using Medicare, not a bad idea. I'm not against it. I just often don't see the benefit of putting huge amounts of money in there. Not that you can add huge amounts of money, but don't get carried away. Now, if you've maxed out your employer plan, if you've maxed out all your IRA and Roth IRA options, and then you want to go and put some extra money here, okay, I'm not opposed to it. So it's not like it's a horrible thing, but think about the pros and cons and make a decision that is in your best interest.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. All right, everybody, I've got a weird interview today, and it's weird because of Phil. This is Phil's issue, so just want to make sure everyone understood that. I put on Facebook a couple of hours ago that I was looking for someone to talk to for the show, and John W. Loftus made a suggestion that I talk to Darren Slade, and Darren Slade jumped in on the conversation on Facebook and indicated that might be a good idea. So here I am talking to Darren. How are you, Darren?
I'm well, Phil, and thank you for clarifying that you're the weird one here.
Yeah.
The interview isn't weird because I'm a bizarre, weird dude. Thanks for that.
Well, and the fun thing for the listeners is, I texted Darren, I guess, messaged you on Facebook, and you're like, yeah, sure, I could come on your show. And I said, how about now? And Darren was like, what would we talk about? And I said, I don't know. And so, Darren, I know basically that you went to Liberty University at some point. I assume that you finished. And I saw that there's something that you did in relationship to the Holocaust. That's about all I know. So we're going to get to meet each other while a few thousand people are listening. Well, at least they'll listen later after I put this on a show.
Oh, wow. That is all you know about me. That's great.
Yeah.
That really doesn't even come close to characterizing me. I did go to Liberty. In fact, I spent 9 years in graduate school there.
Wow. Is the program that long, or are you just a slow learner? I'm kidding.
Oh, my goodness. Look, I came away with 2 master's degrees and a doctorate, I suppose.
That's nice.
Good, right?
Yeah. You did good. Sorry, I just popped into my head. I spent enough time in college myself. I can't complain too much.
Well, so yeah, back when Liberty had a Baptist theological seminary, I was a Baptist minister. So I went to seminary at Liberty. I got 2 master's degrees, one in theology and one in divinity, and then I went on to their new Reformed School of Divinity and got my doctorate there as well.
Okay, so would you consider yourself an expert on being a Baptist, I guess? You wouldn't say baptism, because that's the dunking in the water thing.
Well, sure, I could say I'm an expert in everything. It wouldn't be true.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely. But I tell you, when I was at Liberty, I was a standout kid, for sure. Especially by the time I got to my PhD program, I had been seriously questioning my belief systems, the conservative bent on my religion, and then pretty soon the religion entirely.
Okay.
I was definitely the standout kid, because I would always challenge and question my professors and my colleagues, the other doctoral students. Just a lot of the assumptions and beliefs that we held was clearly wrong. So they needed to know that.
I don't even know in advance. I'm not 100% sure how you're going to answer the question, but now I'm getting an idea as we're talking. Are you still a Christian at this point?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
Are you an atheist at this point?
Yeah, I would characterize myself as an atheist.
Okay. See, I had no idea. I didn't know what I was getting myself into other than a highly recommended conversation. And sometimes that's all I need. And plus, I'm locked in, with this coronavirus thing. Nothing better than talking to an educated person about a fun subject that's not Trump.
My favorite subject, the guy that wears you out before you've even had a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and it's funny because he reminds me that many years ago, I had a boss that was Trump. And he was a 6'2" guy, had the worst hair, would yell, and he would belittle people, and he could be in your face and scream at you, and then 5 minutes later want to take you out and buy you lunch because he was over it. I didn't work that way, but he also stole every idea. Anyone that had anything negative to say about what he did or how he did it, he got rid of them. And so I know this type. So Trump never, ever, ever appealed to me. And it's one of those things that fascinates me, and forgive me on my little rant here. It fascinates me that Why does not every person see what I'm seeing? Have you got that answer?
Well, interestingly, so I'm the president of an academic society and publishing house. We're called the Global Center for Religious Research. And we issued an open letter. We called it an open letter to conscientious evangelicals and the Trump cult. And it's where we expose the hypocrisy and the cult-like mentality of rationalizing and justifying this man's behavior at any cost. And that's exactly what's happening here, is we are, in fact, seeing the development in real time of a cult of personality with this guy.
Yeah, and it drives me insane. And I saw it before he even got elected. But just in the last couple of days, the most extreme thing, and by the way, you didn't ask yet, so I'm going to tell you, we're recording on 4/25, and if everything goes well, this will probably go into a podcast tomorrow, so we can talk about contemporaneous issues. Sometimes I record weeks in advance, and so we try to dodge it. But Trump talked about this injecting cleaners into your body, and people are running out and saying he was kidding, or no, he meant it. I saw a meme going around because I have a few friends that I have left on Facebook so I can get a glimpse into the other world, where they're talking about, well, according to neonatalist doctors, when they inject things into children's lungs, they do call it injecting, and that's probably what Trump was talking about. And I was like, I don't buy that for a second.
Right. Yeah. And he has such extensive medical knowledge that it's clear that that's what he was talking about, legitimate medical practices, which is why, to defend himself, he said he was just being sarcastic, because that's what you do when you're talking about a legitimate medical practice, right? That's how you defend it.
When you're talking about, and I love it when people say global pandemic, that's what the word means, by the way, pandemic. It means the entire world. But anyway, what one does when they're talking about a pandemic is crack jokes about crazy shit that you could put in your body that might kill you faster than the infection. Because that's what one does. And I'm thinking to myself, people are going so far out of their way to make an excuse for what he said that if they could stop and look at objective reality, which they can't, the excuse that they just gave is actually worse than the grotesque incompetence that led to the comments.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're not alone in seeing these things. I saw a person on Facebook post a long old explanation. In fact, they shared it. And it was the most brilliant bullshit I had ever seen, trying to defend him about how he was, in fact, talking about a legitimate medical practice. And all it took was one person to respond back and say, so then why was he saying he was being sarcastic? It doesn't matter whether he was trying to crack a joke, or he was being sarcastic, or if he was being dead serious. Either way you cut and slice it, the guy has a tendency to give bad information, and he poses a dangerous threat.
Oh,
that's the problem.
Absolutely. And almost everything he touches, I think to myself, and I had no idea this was going to be our topic, but it's in the news today, that if somehow Russia could get a Manchurian candidate in as the president, they couldn't do a better job than what Trump's doing.
What's amazing is looking at this from a philosophical and religious perspective. If we were to take a look at this in the history of religion,
yeah,
a cult of personality, he truly is the perfect storm. He's a malignant narcissist, so he lacks any and all empathy. He sees people only for what they can be used to further his own agenda and his own fame. And because of his narcissism, he is so full of it, and yet he genuinely does not know. He's oblivious to any kind of real knowledge. What pops into his head is truth for him. But what's startling is, and what makes this a perfect storm, is we're seeing a cult of personality among religionists, but for non-religious reasons. And I attribute some of this to more of the kind of cult we have around celebrities in our country as it is. We gush over celebrities, and we trace every little thing that people do. And so he is a celebrity. And before he became president, my religious people are hanging on to him so much. That's the peculiar thing. Because normally when we see a cult of personality around religious figures, they develop because of some theology or some charismatic personality. Trump doesn't really possess those characteristics. He knows absolutely nothing about religion or theology.
No.
He's just a dumb celebrity
who
is playing to their conservative the conservative sexual desires, if you will. I mean, they have a hard-on for anything conservative.
Didn't he at some point quote the Bible and say 2 Timothy or something like that? And instead of saying second Timothy or 2 Corinthians, he's like 2 Corinthian, and you're just like, okay.
Yes. Yes. And we'll tell you with a straight face that he reads the Bible more than anybody, and they know that this isn't true. Of course they do. But what we have seen, and this might go to a larger issue, and this is exactly what I witnessed and saw among some of my colleagues, but definitely among some of the professors at Liberty, was this meshing between conservatism and neo-evangelicalism, that you could no longer separate the two. You were not considered a legitimate Christian, and definitely not a legitimate evangelical, if you did not buy and sell everything the Republican Party did.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that worries me is the very process of most religions. I'm going to give myself some room to bow out on some of them, but most religions create a process where you're told things, you accept them, and then you post hoc find a way to rationalize it in your own head. And one of my favorite quotes that I came up with is that apologetics arguments don't have to be good. They have to be good enough.
Yes. They just have to be convenient.
Right.
Because all you need is just something to hold on to so you can do away with the actual heavy work of investigation. So long as something sounds plausibly true, I go with that, and I don't have to expend any brain energy trying to, figure anything out.
Yeah, I'm with you. So let's go back in your life a little time. Apparently, you grew up Baptist. Is that fair to say? Your family, your parents?
No, actually, no. I didn't grow up in any religious belief system or religious house, nothing like that. I had a pretty traumatic experience in high school, and quite frankly, religion is what saved me from wanting to end my life. It was a saving grace for me. So
well, I am delighted to hear that, at least.
Well, what had caught me, because of my emotional distress and my depression and the severity of everything that was going on in my life, I was a prime target for conversion. In fact, I remember when I was taking evangelism classes in graduate school, they would talk about the 5 Ds of evangelism, and one of them, the 5 Ds, are the different things that people go through in life that make them susceptible to hearing the gospel, hearing the message.
What? I genuinely don't know what these are. Please tell me.
Well, and I don't recall all 5 of the Ds,
okay.
But there are things like divorce,
death, depression.
So the traumatic things,
yeah.
Right? I wouldn't be surprised if something like depression was one of the Ds.
Divorce,
so
maybe.
These are the times that's right. So these are the times when somebody is most susceptible to converting. And that's because they need an answer. They need something there. And religion did, in fact, save me. It really was a benefit for me, but not to the point that I was willing to sacrifice truth and knowledge just to hold on to a fantasy. So as I grew up, as I went to graduate school and I learned, and I'm a bit of an autodidact. I absolutely love studying and researching. And I've heard of people like you. Yeah, we're fun. We're kind of the jackasses at parties. So I couldn't get enough of research. I couldn't get enough diving into stuff that I wasn't being exposed to in seminary. And so when I started actually doing the heavy work, the real research by actual scholars, not just by evangelical sycophants who will just tote the party line, I discovered there were so many inconsistencies and so many problems with the belief system that I had adhered to that it really came down to, am I going to follow where the truth is, where the evidence lies, or do I just maintain a belief system because it makes me comfortable?
That is fascinating. Did you take any notes? Are you going to write a book about this?
Should I? I don't know.
You should. People love, Phil loves deconversion stories. and I think depending on how you sell it, word it, phrase it, frame it, depending on how you frame it, it's something that non-believers and believers alike could read to see and understand your journey.
Well, I tell you what, if I ever did do something like that, I'm going to make sure you write the forward to it, okay?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you're going to want that. My writing skills, as you saw from my text messages, are really bad. I had a blog for 5 years, and I rose to the level of insignificance because my writing skills, it's one of those things that true friends would tell me, Phil, you should do a podcast because you speak better than you write. and they weren't necessarily even saying I'm the best speaker, but I do speak better than I write, but it's a pretty low bar.
That's funny.
So you're at Liberty and you're learning and you're studying and you're going outside necessarily the things that they're teaching you, and you had some choices to make. What was the kind of stuff that you stumbled across that just seemed nonsensical or conflicting or unbelievable?
Well, I'll tell you, some of the things that I really got fascinated with was neuroscience and cognitive biases. For some reason, I fell in love with the study of psychology.
Oh, excellent.
And the psychology of religion.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things I had learned was something called a confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And you know this very well.
I do. Ironically, my undergraduate degree started in physics and I ended up in psychology, and I've been a casual studier of religion and how and why people believe stuff. So I'm right there with you, but go ahead.
Well, so you already know this phenomenon real well, and it's become more and more popular in atheist communities to talk about this. But we naturally, in every facet of our life, we as a species will seek out only information, and we will memorize and emphasize that information that supports our already held beliefs.
Yeah.
So in other words, we don't develop belief systems because we're reasonable, rational humans.
Right.
And we don't develop belief systems because we've investigated anything. On the contrary, the most of us develop a belief system out of impulse, out of pure cultural conditioning. And then we close our minds off to everything else. And so once I learned about this, I then learned, there are actual ways that you can counter the confirmation bias. And one of the most important things is that you try to disprove your belief system.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I went to do. Now, for me, as an apologist, as a former Christian apologist and a theologian, the number one thing that I wanted to look into, of course, was the resurrection. Because
yes.
If that falls apart, everything else goes away.
Yeah, it kind of kills it. I remember one time in a bar in a hotel that was hosting an atheist conference. Ended up sitting next to somebody who was just there, a normal human for work, staying in the hotel. And we started talking about the conference, and they told me they were a Christian, but they didn't think that Jesus actually existed. And I was like, what?
Oh, what?
Wait, what? Then why are you using the label Christian? And they basically said that that is an okay buzzword to say, and no one will confront them or argue with them. If they said that they weren't a Christian and they believe these other things, it would be a big fight. But as soon as they say they're a Christian, the other person who also thinks they're a Christian will kind of let anything slide, because you could have something like the Calvinist, where it's predetermined whether you go to heaven. You can have like the Catholic Church, where you have to give money and be forgiven, or you can have the Baptist, which I may getting out of my specialty here, where you beg for forgiveness from the guy, and you've got a personal relationship, and you're covered in his blood, so you get to go. So they're used to every answer being different, but as long as you use the word Christian, it's okay.
Yeah, and it is kind of your get-out-of-jail-free card in this country, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
All you got to sit there and say is, the Lord Jesus has washed me in his blood, so I need your grace and forgiveness that I molested this child, or that I assaulted this teenage girl. And I guess all is forgiven then. But Lord help you if you're an atheist.
Yeah, so you studied the resurrection and the 4 stories that share the exact same story, right?
Oh, of course. But more than that. What I found was just a torrent of counter information, of counter evidence to suggest that we ought to even come close to taking some of the stories about the resurrection seriously. And this came from all fields of study: anthropology, psychology, philosophy, sociology. All of the fields by experts have already touched and done away with this subject, to the point that it becomes kind of ludicrous to hold on to a belief. I'll tell you, so I run an academic journal. It's called the Socio-Historical Examination of Religion and Ministry, or SHRM for short. And we just published an article by 2 philosophers of religion, some of the most famous guys out there, Robert Gregg Cavan and Carlos Colombetti. And their article, it uses particle physics to disprove the possibility of the resurrection.
What?
They take it's one of the most amazing articles you'll ever read. The thing is 60 pages long, and it's incredible. The article's title is called "The Implausibility and Low Explanatory Power of the Resurrection Hypothesis," and it uses particle physics, what is known about particle physics, to demonstrate that even if God existed, a resurrection would still be impossible. The kind of resurrection as described and believed by the Gospels and by Christians today.
That is
truly fascinating.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Since I threw out that my original degree was going to be physics, I'm extra tempted to look at that, and I'm going to ask you to send me at some point, not now, but at some point, send me a link. And if I put together show notes, I'll share the link if it's publicly available to your SHRM thing, and people can go look at it and read it.
Yeah, that'd be great. And in fact, all of our articles that we publish, all the research that we do, is free and available to the public.
I like that, because it's funny that to loop back around to this Trump thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the reasonably good journalism right now on social media is a paywall, and it requires that you kick in a couple of bucks a month, or $20 a year. The free stuff is crap, and people share it, and they get these ideas from the free news.
Yes, absolutely. And in academia, it's no less exploitative. And in fact, this was one of the reasons why we started things like the Global Center for Religious Research and SHRM Journal. We wanted to make sure that academic research was free and available to the public, and super accessible.
Yeah.
That way, academics and researchers weren't being taken advantage of. So we don't charge people anything to read our stuff.
So you read the 4 Gospels, the ones that were voted into the Bible, and did not find them compelling eyewitness testimonies, I'm guessing.
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, one of my chapter contributions in John Loftus's recent book, The Case Against Miracles, I discuss how do you properly investigate a miracle claim. Now, I'm former law enforcement. I have the training necessary to do actual investigations. And so what I do is I explore all the psychological variables that interfere with eyewitness testimony and just how these variables, these distortions, even if ancient first century witnesses really did think that they saw Jesus alive and well after his crucifixion, we know enough about psychology. We know enough about human nature to say, no, I can't just take your word for it. I can't just take you at face value, especially with something as extraordinary and implausible as coming back from the dead.
Yeah, that does seem highly unlikely. I've had conversations with people who are religious, and I'll ask them questions, and often they'll say something like, well, you should talk to our minister. He can explain it better. And I say,
yes.
Wait. If you can't explain it, you can't understand it. And you're going out and you're having this conversation with me, whether you knocked on my door or I met you somewhere and you felt compelled to tell me this stuff. You're taking this on as something that you think is important to do, but you haven't gotten yourself to the point that you understand it well enough to explain it. I'm flabbergasted by that, and they, I guess, generally don't get that kind of a response.
Well, you know what? It goes even higher than that, though. It isn't just the layman who did that. I was trained in apologetics by the famous Gary Habermas. Now, he's considered one of the foremost authorities on the resurrection, Christian apologist authorities.
Yeah. I guess that I was going to say, expert on what? On the stories. Okay. I you can be an expert on Harry Potter. It doesn't mean it really happened.
Well, but he's developed one of the most famous ways of, quote unquote, proving the resurrection had happened, things like that.
Well, what is it?
I would get into debate with him. In fact, I had 2 official debates with him when I was in my doctoral studies, and there were times where he would just sit there and say, he would get stumped and say, you'll have to refer to this other scholar. He knows this information best. It was always passing the buck. Don't ask me about this. Don't ask me about that. I'm not sure. In fact, I remember one time I had brought up a confirmation bias to him just in class. It wasn't during a debate, but I said, how do you know we are not just engaging in a confirmation bias? And his response was, well, other people do it too. So
that's whataboutism. That's one of my other favorites.
It's exactly it.
Yeah, I mean, the 50,000 and counting dead from coronavirus just in the United States. Benghazi. I mean, Hillary killed people too. It's that bizarre thinking that people actually throw into my face and just like, really? You thought that was a good idea? You thought that was a productive thing to say for this discussion? Okay.
Well, that's the frustrating thing. Our species did not evolve to be rational thinkers. And it's really disappointing for those of us who actually prioritize reason and logic.
Yeah.
Or empirical evidence.
It's a tricky thing, and one of the things other thing I love to do when I'm talking to somebody is they'll give me this argument, and I said, which one of the arguments that you're presenting to me was the one that convinced you? And they're like, oh, no arguments convinced me. I just know it's true. And I go, well, based on what? Don't give me arguments you think will convince me. I want to hear what convinced you. And then they're like, well, that's not going to sound rational, because I found when I opened a box in my mother's attic, and when I first opened it up, there was a little silver cross and a chain, and it had been in that box for 50 years. And so I became a Christian. And I just stare at them and I'm like, what? That's your go-to? Oh my.
That's exactly what you had just touched on. These are post hoc rationalizations.
Yeah.
The belief system did not develop and is not adhered to because of any reason, any evidence. It is simply believed and then after the fact defended and justified.
Yeah, it's...
And unfortunately, this is what we're seeing with the Trump cults as well.
Yeah.
They
You can't deny that.
All of their they bet on the wrong horse, and now they are desperately trying to save face. So for those that actually recognize the imbecile that is our president, for others, he really is the savior. And questioning him is the equivalent of questioning God.
It's a funny thing. I've thought of the classic story, Emperor's New Clothes, where when the child points out in his innocence that the king has no clothes on, that the spell is broken, and everyone realizes the king is indeed naked. But the world we live in today, that child is going to be grabbed and thrown into a crate because everyone goes, how dare you say that our king has no clothes on? And
well, it's exactly what we saw with the Christianity Today article that denounced Trump.
Yeah, tell us about that, because I know of it a little bit, but tell me more.
Well, yeah, so you know that the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, which is an evangelical magazine, during the impeachment process had come out and said, Trump is guilty and he's a deplorable human being and he needs to be removed from office. Well, the backlash from the evangelical community was quick and it was horrendous. I mean, they were more willing to cut down and crucify fellow believers before they ever second guess that emperor with no clothes on.
Now, would you say this was less dramatic or more dramatic when the Dixie Chicks said that George Bush was a bad guy?
More dramatic.
Okay.
But,
okay.
Just yeah.
That's a fun story for me when the Dixie Chicks did that. And if the listeners don't know, they're going to have to just Google it, because I don't want to spoil your precious time with my little ramblings on the Dixie Chicks. But so you did graduate from Liberty after 9 years. And so you're a doctorate and what? You have 2 doctorates or 2 masters? I didn't keep up there. I'm sorry.
No, I have 2 masters and a doctorate. My doctorate is in theology, apologetics, and church history.
Okay. And how do you make money now that you're kind of atheist and not going to be a minister and take money from people?
Who says I make money? That's definitely not the case. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have been a stay-at-home dad for my soon-to-be 3-year-old. So for the past 3 years, I've been a stay-at-home dad mostly. But like I said, I do run GCRR and SHRM. So, and we are also a book publishing company. We do publish atheist and religious material. It's all academic based. So, hopefully, maybe that'll turn a profit.
Yeah, I know some people that after they write their 10th or 11th book, they can actually make a living. Because it's not from one. I mean, some people write Harry Potter, but most mortal human beings, might make 20 or 30 grand off a book if they're lucky. And then, of course, the sales fade after 6 months to 12 months.
Yeah, and of course, when you're dealing with academia, nobody goes out and buys your stuff. Nobody wants to read your academic jargon. It's a tricky situation unless you're a professor somewhere, which has always been my dream. It's always something that I've been trying to become. I am an adjunct professor, but in the humanities at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design.
Okay.
But apart from being a professor, you're not really going to make much money off of your academic career.
Yeah, and do you have a YouTube channel as well?
I do.
What is that?
Now, the main one is just going to be the Global Center for Religious Research. That's the YouTube channel, and that's where we do educational videos.
Okay.
In fact, I just did one on the influence of pandemics on religion and religious history.
Oh, nice. So, I mean, you keep tying this all together. This is brilliant. Have you been able to monetize YouTube in any way and make a few bucks?
Everything that all these ventures are so new that nothing has been monetized.
Okay.
Yet.
Well, if I can give you one bit of advice, Patreon. That's the place to go.
Yep, we have a Patreon account. In fact, one of our things, so the Global Center for Religious Research is putting together a neuroimaging research study. We have access to several fMRI machines at Onschutz Medical Center and CU, and we have connections with some faculty who are psychologists and neuroimagers. And what we want to do is study the effects of religious trauma syndrome on people, and the links between that and PTSD, things. You know, we hear about religious trauma syndrome being a thing, but in the literature, there is no such thing as religious trauma syndrome.
Now, is religious trauma syndrome the effects that you suffer when you leave religion? Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, it's for when people, it's kind of become a catchphrase for when people have been victimized or abused by institutional religion.
Okay.
Think of some of the clergy sex scandals or other things, right?
Yeah.
Just having been raised in a fundamentalist home. And so we use this catch-all phrase, religious trauma syndrome, as though it's a bona fide, legitimate thing, like it's in the DSM-5 or something. And in fact, there is no such thing. And what our study, our neuroimaging study, wants to do is take volunteers who have had religious trauma in their past, put them in an fMRI machine, and see if we can identify parts of the brain that light up when exposed to religious, whatever, iconography or religious suggestion, something like that, to see if there is a link between PTSD and religious trauma, if PTSD and religious trauma syndrome is the exact same thing, or if we can, in fact, classify religious trauma as a unique and different subset of traumatic experience. So we use things like Patreon.
Go ahead.
Sorry, we use things like Patreon and stuff like that to help fund some of this research.
Well, what is the Patreon page? And you can tell us so some listeners can go and throw money at you.
Well, like everything, it's under Global Center for Religious Research.
And so that's www.gcrr.org. And at Patreon, what is it? Patreon.com/what?
It's probably GCRR.
Okay. That is absolutely fantastic. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to talk about, rant about, discuss? It's open mic night. What do you got?
I noticed that you mentioned the Holocaust at the very beginning. And,
indeed.
It's kind of funny that you associated me with that. So part of our academic society is that we do hold international conferences, and we are hosting an international conference on religion and the Holocaust this coming August.
Well, you're planning on it anyway.
Well, it's all virtual, so we're doing it all online.
Oh, okay, so you can still do it. Yeah, good call.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can attend from the comfort and safety of your own home, and it only costs $12 to attend the 3-day academic conference. Or if you're a GCRR Academic Society member, it costs $9.
And what is this conference going to cover?
Well, anything related to religion and the Holocaust.
Okay.
So right now we have two main keynote speakers, Dr. Zev Garber and Dr. Charles David Isbell. Now, these two are some of the world's foremost scholars on the Holocaust and Jewish studies. And so they'll be talking about things like the medieval anti-Semitism and how that led to the Holocaust, or to just the theology behind some of the Holocaust ideology, and the ideology of Nazism.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through your Facebook page, and I saw that there was a video here of going into Auschwitz, which I had the pleasure, disfortune, unfortunate, whatever. I went there about 3 years ago. That was pretty amazing place to visit.
I'm so jealous. I would love to go someplace like that.
Well, maybe people can throw enough money at you. But yeah, say you need to go there and do research, and you can go see all the buildings and stuff that they've saved and maintained, so you can actually see that it's real. Another thing I could rant on, and I'm scrolling down, and this is one of my favorites because I was in this city as well, the Shroud of Turin. And it's in the city of Torino. But did you guys take a position on the Shroud of Turin? What's going on with that?
Well, officially we don't have any position, but we're not gonna make issue positions necessarily on things like that.
Okay.
We do have a blog, and our one of my officers in the academic society had written a blog post on the Shroud of Turin, which is really good and discusses actually a lot of the stuff that you and I are talking about today. But I'll tell you, so I'm out here in Colorado, and down in Colorado Springs, there is the International Institute for Turin Studies or whatever. And it's just a little itty-bitty storefront thing, nothing huge, but it's run by one of the guys who helped do scientific studies on the Shroud back in, I don't know if it was the 70s, back when the Catholic Church brought it out for scientific examination.
Yeah.
And it was the first and only time. So in preparation for one of my doctoral classes, I went down to the Institute and got to interview that guy, and that was very interesting. It was very fascinating. And going back to what we were talking about with the apologetics, that the argument doesn't need to be good. It just needs to exist.
Right.
Well, sure enough, the guy, the head of the Institute, who very much believes that the Shroud is real and legit, he says to me, we know that the blood on the Shroud is not real blood. It tests positive for taint.
Why did he call it blood then?
Well, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Well, it tests as taint, but it looks like it's blood.
Yeah.
And he says to me with a straight face, he says, so what I'm trying to do is figure out how blood can come back as paint in the lab. Wow. And I asked him, I said, well, isn't that kind of a confirmation bias that you're just reaching for anything? And he says, it doesn't have to be true. It just has to exist. It just has to be a possibility, and then we can go on with our belief. And I'm not joking, with straight face, without skipping a beat. He says these words as though this is what a rational scientific mind thinks.
Well, I think you're being too kind. I think that's what a mind thinks. Yeah, we can twist ourselves in all kinds of knots and ignore reality, and absolutely great fun. So, listeners, once again, it is Darren with 2 R's, Slade, and maybe all Darrens are 2 R's. If that's the case, I'm stupid. That's fine. You have the shermjournal.org. You can also be found on YouTube if you look him up. And what was the other site here? The Global Center for Religious Research, right? That's yours.
That's correct.
GCRR.org. And in case we ever have secular/atheistic conferences again, would you be interested in giving a talk somewhere?
Oh, I'd love that.
Okay, so just in case I have someone who listens who happens to help organize a conference, contact Darren. He can talk all about Jesus and the Shroud and all kinds of other fun topics. Darren, thank you so much for this last-minute impromptu conversation. I know I had a great time. Hopefully you had some fun too.
I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me on, Phil.
What did this person who made this world intend it for? And this is the point where you think, well, it fits me very well. You know, the caves and the forests and the stream and the mammoths. He must have made it for me. I mean, there's no other conclusion you can come to. And it's rather like a puddle waking up one morning. I know they don't normally do this, but allow me, I'm a science fiction writer. A puddle wakes up one morning and thinks, This is a very interesting world I find myself in. It fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, I mean, really precise, isn't it? It must have been made to have me in it. And the sun rises, and he's continuing to narrate the story about this hole being made to have him in it. And the sun rises, and gradually the puddle is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And by the time the puddle ceases to exist, it's still thinking, it's still trapped in this idea that the hole was there for it. And if we think the world is here for us, we will continue to destroy it in the way that we've been destroying it.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
I do hope you enjoyed the interview with Darren Slade as much as I did. After we finished the segment for the show, we talked for probably another hour. Wonderful guy to talk to, and I think, at least for me, it was a nice change of pace from being stuck inside, these stay-at-home orders. And sometimes people call them, you're forcibly locked in. You're not locked in. Well, I guess most people aren't. Maybe your state is different, but I can go outside. I've been able to go to stores, buy groceries, get prescriptions. One should try to reduce the times that they go out. They should reduce the places they go. They should use precautions and try to stay away from other people. Wear a face mask if you can get one. That's a nice idea. I go to my CVS here a couple times, and I even wore gloves inside and had disinfectant wipes and some Lysol to spray things when we got them home. So, it's a different time, but, a lot of businesses, it's pretty much the same, but there are a lot of businesses where I could see this change in behavior is devastating to their business model, and there's going to be a lot of businesses that won't make it through this. We have a local restaurant, pizzeria, whatever, that does carry out and delivery. And it's just this little space in the strip mall. And they've been booming with business because you can call and have stuff delivered. And what they used to do is you would walk in and buy your food that you ordered and just take it away. There's no place to actually sit down in there. But what they've done now is they bring it out to you. So you're not allowed inside this little teeny storefront. And you pay in advance with your credit card. And you call them and say, I'm out here. I'm in my car. You describe your car to them. And they walk out and they hand you the food. So there's no currency changing back and forth, no coins, not even taking credit cards back and forth because it's all done electronically. They hand you the food and you drive home. They're probably doing as well, if not better than before. But down at the end of the strip mall is a restaurant where people would go and sit down and maybe be there for an hour or two and enjoy a nice, luxurious, high-quality meal. But who wants to pay for a $50 or $60 meal handed to you in a plastic bag? Getting some pizza is cool, or some wings or ribs maybe, but it really destroys the whole dining experience for that type of a restaurant. Well, maybe they still have bills to pay. They have a mortgage to pay. They have rent to pay on that property. And this is where the government should be stepping in instead of kind of sort of half-assed doing this whole process and making sure that employers like that can continue to pay their employees, making sure other companies which have slowed down or whatever pay their employees. So we're not spending a fortune trying to keep people alive in the hospital. But on the other extreme, of course, we have the numbnuts like what just happened in Wisconsin the other day. Apparently like 2,000 to 3,000 people protested at the Madison State Capitol, 95% of them without masks and a bunch of them with guns. I guess I shouldn't say most. A bunch of them with guns. They sure make the pictures that way. And we'll see if those people make the cases worse in Wisconsin and other states where they've had these big protests. So I am sympathetic to the people that are suffering, and I wish that we had a better organized government that could help those people. So I don't know what the right solution is, but probably marching around with your big fancy machine guns or guns that aren't technically machine guns, but whatever. I don't want to have gun semantics debate with you. Anyway, if you have show topic ideas, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. If you have questions about your specific portfolio, you can do the same. If you have guest suggestions, you can send those to me. If it's someone really famous, it would help me a lot if you had contact information or knew them. Just suggesting that I should have on Ricky Gervais does not help me at all, because I'm probably never going to have on Ricky Gervais. So think that through a little bit before you tell me. Otherwise, thank you for listening to the show. And if you can, leave a comment on iTunes or Stitcher. I think those are the two places that have comments. And I appreciate you listening to the show. And hopefully by the fall or next year, we'll have conferences again, and I can see you somewhere in person. Until then, ciao.